John Smith has definitely left a mark on history. His name is often used as a generic example name and referenced in pop culture.
John Smith, Health and Safety.
King Days, registered post.
Don't mind me.
Chief Inspector Smith from Scotland Yard, known as the Doctor.
John Smith, you're real.
He's lying. Look at his face.
Just say
Someone's
it.
called John Smith.
Now listen to me.
Come on.
He even appeared as the male protagonist and love interest voiced by Mel Gibson in Disney's 1995 movie Pocahontas.
No, wait, please.
Although it is true that John Smith is a fairly common name, he was not romantically involved with Pocahontas. So who was he, and can we separate the man from the myth? I would like to begin with a disclaimer that this biography was primarily developed from John Smith's own writings, and even John Smith retold stories in his works sometimes 2 or 3 times and rarely the same way with the same details. That being said, this biography has been constructed with this in mind and aims to capture the overall arc of his life, acknowledging that many of these events are only told from his perspective. John Smith was born to parents George and Alice Smith and baptized in January 1580 at St. Helena's Church in Willoughby, England. His father was a yeoman farmer who owned land in Lincolnshire and also rented land from Lord Willoughby, who was related through marriage. As a child, John was educated in reading, writing, arithmetic, and Latin at a nearby grammar school. He allegedly ran away at age 13 to become a sailor, but his father caught him and apprenticed him to a local merchant. After his father died in 1596, 16-year-old John followed Lord Willoughby to fight against the Spanish in the Franco-Spanish War. After fighting ended in 1598, he returned to England. Not long after returning, John Smith became a recluse, spending his time reading books about the rules of war and politics. Lord Willoughby had an Italian nobleman, Theodore Paleologus, visit John, who helped him to improve his horsemanship and jousting skills and pulled him back into English society. In 1600, John Smith set his eyes on serving in the war fought between the Holy Roman Empire and the Ottoman Turks, so he left for Austria to join the army. While traveling to Italy, where he would then continue to Hungary where the fighting was taking place, the ship on which he was traveling sank. John washed ashore and was rescued by a captain. He joined the captain's crew, who engaged in trade and piracy. He was present at a few stops throughout the Mediterranean, and on the way back to France they won a battle against a Venetian ship, and John left the voyage 500 gold sequins richer. He then traveled from Italy to Austria, where he signed up with the army. John Smith was promoted to captain, a title he would use for the rest of his life while fighting in Hungary. He was also awarded by the Prince of Transylvania with the title of English Gentleman, and had a coat of arms engraved to accompany this title. The coat of arms depicted 3 heads representing 3 Turkish officers he had decapitated when in personal combat, and the motto Vincere est vivere, Latin for to conquer is to live. While fighting in Transylvania in 1602, he was wounded in battle, captured, and enslaved by a Turkish officer who sent John as a gift to his fiancée in Constantinople, who John called Corazza Trebizondia. According to John's account, Corazza became smitten with him and sent him to a brother who John Smith called Timar Bishaw, who ran a fiefdom in present-day Russia near Rostov, quote, to learn the language and what it is to be a Turk till time made her master of herself, unquote. Instead of instructing John, Timar mistreated him by shaving his head, placing an iron ring around his neck, giving him little to eat, and often beating him. During one such beating, John overpowered Timar, killing him and hiding his body before fleeing his enslavement using Timar's horse and clothing. Traveling for days and unsure of his route, he was befriended by a Russian man and his wife Kalamata, who housed and supplied him so that he could travel back to England, finally returning in 1604. When the Virginia Company recruited settlers in 1606, John Smith volunteered. The Virginia Company had received a royal charter from King James I, granting it permission to colonize part of the east coast of North America in search of profits. John made it a point to become friendly with the men interested in colonizing North America, including Henry Hudson, the famous navigator, Richard Hakluyt, a geographer, and Bartholomew Gosnold, who would travel to Virginia. Before the expedition left, they were given a box that was not to be opened until arriving and held the names of the men who would form the governing council in Virginia. The fleet departed in December of 1606. During the voyage, apparently at odds with some of the other gentlemen, Smith was accused of attempting to organize a mutiny and was restrained for most of the trip to Virginia. It appears that Smith, who had strong opinions, made enemies with Edward Maria Wingfield, who was one of the lead investors. When the ships reached Cape Henry in Virginia in late April of 1607, and the settlers opened a box containing a list of men that the Virginia Company had appointed as a governing council for the new colony, John Smith, who was still restrained, his name was on the list, the others being Christopher Newport, Bartholomew Gosnold, John Ratcliffe, Edward Maria Wingfield, George Kendall, and John Martin. After some scouting about, they settled on a site 40 miles up the James River, which would become Jamestown. Released in early June, John took his place on the council against the original wishes of some of the other council members, seemingly with Reverend Robert Hunt arguing for John's appointment. Within a few months, he was given the position of Cape Merchant, which meant he was in charge of procuring goods and supplies from the local environment and the indigenous peoples living there. By September, over 60 colonists had died from illness stemming from a combination of lack of quality food, poor water, disease, unsuitable clothing, and heat and humidity. That same fall of 1607, problems developed with the members of the council. The president of the council, Edward Maria Wingfield, was accused of hoarding supplies for himself and was deposed and confined. Bartholomew Gosnold died of illness, and George Kendall was executed, either on charges of mutiny or espionage. As the number of leaders declined, John Smith's power and importance as a leader rose. While exploring the Chickahominy River and hunting for deer in December of 1607, John Smith was captured by Powhatan leader Opichan Canoe and his men, and eventually taken to Paramount Chief Powhatan. Here, John claims that he was ordered to be put to death, but that one of Paramount Chief Powhatan's daughters, Amanute, who was nicknamed Pocahontas, and would have been around age 10 or 11, saved him by placing herself between him and his executioners. Many historians and anthropologists suggest that these events were probably a ceremony in which Paramount Chief Powhatan was acknowledging John Smith as part of the Powhatan Paramount Chiefdom, and that John misinterpreted the situation. It is clear, though, that Paramount Chief Powhatan released John, who was escorted back to James Fort, and his relationship with Paramount Chief Powhatan shaped many of the early successes and challenges of Jamestown. Starting in June and ending in September of 1608, Smith went on 2 voyages to explore the Chesapeake region. These explorations later enabled him to draw a remarkably accurate map of Virginia, which was used for decades after its publication, and displayed important geographical information alongside the expansiveness of the indigenous communities in the area. In the fall of 1608, John Smith became president of the colony. Under his guidance, tar, pitch, and soap ash were made to be shipped back to England. The first well was dug, houses were built, crops were planted, and people were sent to acquire food from the land. He strengthened defenses, enforced discipline, and tried to trade for food from Powhatan peoples, but often resorted to threats of military force for them to comply. The English colonists had a contentious and increasingly aggressive relationship with the Powhatan people, eventually turning violent as the English colonists stole food and destroyed towns. By January 1609, John Smith's and Paramount Chief Powhatan's relationship had degraded to the point that each leader plotted the other's death under the guise of civil negotiations. Neither party succeeded in their plan. John Smith did a lot to keep the colony alive during his time as president, but his time in Virginia had expired. In September 1609, while sleeping in a boat, John was injured when his powder bag exploded, and the injury forced his return to London to receive medical treatment. Even without the return home, he likely would have had a tough time in the colony, as the company's shareholders in London instituted a reorganization of the colony's leadership. John Smith writes that he believes Gabriel Archer and John Radcliffe were plotting to kill him after they returned during the summer of 1609. John Smith wanted to return to Jamestown after his recovery, but the Virginia Company refused to send him back. Still interested in America, he contacted the Plymouth Company and sailed in 1614 to the area he named New England and mapped the coast from Penobscot Bay to Cape Cod. Allegedly, most of the crew spent their time fishing, while John and 8 others explored the coast and traded rifles for beaver, marten, and otter skins to return to England. Thomas Hunt, who commanded the other ship on this voyage, stayed behind and captured and enslaved some of the indigenous peoples in the area, including Squanto of the Patuxet. John was convinced that Thomas Hunt was intentionally upsetting the local indigenous peoples just so that John would have a tough time trading and colonizing the area. In 1617, John Smith attempted to make one final voyage, but unfavorable winds kept the expedition from sailing. John advocated for English colonization of New England for the rest of his life, but he never went there again. Alongside his maps, he was a prolific writer, publishing detailed descriptions of Virginia and New England, books on seamanship, and a history of English colonization. His books and maps were made to be useful and were consulted to plan the 1620 Mayflower voyage. Allegedly, the Mayflower Pilgrims nearly selected John to be their military advisor, but selected Miles Standish instead. John Smith died in 1631 at the age of 51 in the London home of his friend Sir Samuel Saltonstall of an unrecorded illness. Thanks in part to John's work, the Jamestown colony was thriving. Even though the Virginia Company had failed, the colonists were making money off of tobacco, and New England had taken off with the founding of Plymouth, Salem, and Boston. John Smith was buried in 1633 at the St. Sepulchre without Newgate Church in London. A stained glass window on the south wall of the church depicts his likeness in commemoration of his life. John Smith's legacy can be difficult to reconcile. His leadership and work certainly led to the survival and success of many English colonists in Virginia and New England, but laid the groundwork for the farther expansion of English colonies into indigenous peoples' land. Although much of what he says cannot be definitively labeled as true or false, his writings do seem rife with exaggeration and misunderstanding, which can leave us with more questions than answers. Regardless, this brief biography hardly covers even a drop of the many stories that John Smith wrote about in his life, and if you are interested in reading more, links will be provided in the description. Thank you for watching. Please leave any comments that you have below, and remember to keep the comments section productive and respectful. We hope you enjoyed, and we will see you next time.